When you employ somebody, I think you can expect to put an honest day working.
Tony expects a lot from himself, so he expects it from everybody else.
That's just how it is.
Well, I don't think we should run it like this.
No, we're lucky that it didn't crack and just came as and then chunk falls off. So I'd say you're pretty much toast.
From worrying about the consequences of the performance of a dangerous and rather unnecessary prank, to the resolve to develop the mentality to do all that it takes to push through such troubled times, here's how Tony Beets suddenly died in Gold Rush. Who would have thought the day would come where we'd be talking about the legendary gold miner Tony Beets and his impending death? Sure, the man has been a living legend in the mining industry for decades. Apart from that, he was well known for his experience in other working-class sectors and industries, such as construction and farming. As such, the concept of the end being near for the king of the Klondike, especially as he is getting so advanced in his years, wasn't too far-fetched to consider. That said, fans of all 14 or so seasons of Gold Rush would be delighted to hear that all this talk of a funeral didn't mean that the veteran king of the Klondike was approaching the end of his days. No, it looks like he'll be around for a long time, so that he can continue cursing and swearing at those who'd bother to listen. However, it still doesn't mean that something isn't afoot in the legendary miners' camp.
You know, and so people that give it the effort and that take chances, they deserve a certain amount of credit.
Without him, there wouldn't have been a gold rush. So we're all good.
You see, all this talk about a funeral, and Tony Beets only occurred because Tony decided to take part in a strange and unexpected practice that will attract a lot of trouble that Tony didn't need, especially in the light of the fact that he was currently in the middle of some of the most important projects and applications that would affect his mining operations. You see, Tony caused a lot of trouble when he decided to participate in a controversial act known as a mining funeral. This has left everybody in shock. By everybody, we mean those on the show and those watching at home. We're even talking about his critics who were barely able to stomach the antics of this brash veteran. Now they have a reason to whisper about this man with decades of experience as a gold miner out in the Klondike. They were still trying to understand the motive behind performing this strange ritual. After all, the man has been known for his controversial decisions in the past, but this has taken it up a notch. It's actually all insane, because when you hear about what happened, you may actually be more upset about the fact that it may not totally even be Tony's fault. That said, he was still quite in the wrong when he took a step back and took a look at his role in what occurred on the fateful day of the performance of this rather unusual and even more dangerous Viking funeral. You see, this all happened all the way back in 2017. On the final days of the season of that year, the team were packing up after what they considered to be a successful season. The guys were rounding up and getting ready to head back home so that they could enjoy the fruits of their labor. What they didn't know was that this would result in one of the most problematic situations for themselves and the team as a whole in the future.
Great gold waste coming out of 80 pump these days. That is nothing but great paying.
Everything was fine until a worker known as Mark Favren was getting ready to leave. However, he felt that he couldn't leave without doing something he considered spectacular for the guys. Eager to show off for his boys, Mark approached Tony to see if he could get the permission he required to perform what he considered to be a funny joke. The man was just strange like that. This is where Tony could have actually exerted his authority in a proper manner. Sure, he may not be a stickler to the rules or anything that may be considered orthodox, but after hearing about what this prank involved, he should have shut Mark down immediately. However, rather than doing so, he allowed the man to literally spark the flames that could threaten to burn his gold mining empire down in the future. So, again, rather than stopping Mark from performing what is known as this Viking funeral, he watched as the rest of his men gathered so that Mark could douse gallons of petrol in the water. As if that isn't damaging enough to the water and the environment as a whole, Tony and the rest of his men watched and cheered as Mark and another participant in this so-called prank set the water on fire, thereby completing this warped homage to the Norse funeral rites. Well, we hope that they all enjoyed this prank because, as we alluded to, a host of problems followed this strange display of fire. They had failed to acknowledge the fact that not only was this act highly immoral, as they were pumping tons of dangerous toxins and carcinogens into the environment, this reckless and borderline malicious prank was highly illegal. Let's try and ignore the fact that they were damaging the innocent wildlife that would be forced to endure the consequences of this ridiculous prank. Mark and Tony were also putting the rest of their men at risk for some silly spectacle. What if that fire got out of control and several members of the team got hurt or lost their lives? Tony should definitely have thought things through before he gave Mark permission to spark those dangerous flames. Well, the consequences began to come in soon after the stunt was pulled. For starters, Mark was slapped immediately with a $1,725 fine that left him reeling after pleading guilty to performing the stupid prank. Before long, Tony found himself in Yukon Territorial Court to make himself accountable to the authorities. After all, not only had he allowed the prank to occur on his watch, he also made the stupid mistake of failing to report the matter to the authorities like he was supposed to in such a situation. Maybe he never realized the extent of what may have happened under his watch, but they may have been suspicious that he just didn't care. Either way, he allowed the authorities to find out about this dangerous act when the show was broadcast to the world, and that, of course, will not do at all. This unexpected move and the adverse impact it may have had on the environment as a whole has left fans wondering about the significance of the act and how it may affect Tony's position on the Gold Rush TV show. Well, for now they can say that it may give us a look into the mind of the veteran gold miner and his tendency of breaking the rules set by the status quo. As you can imagine, this leaves the fans on the edges of their seats as they ponder on the future of the veteran gold miner. I wonder what these fans make of the insight into the legendary gold miner's mind. Sure, they always knew that they were dealing with a maverick, but now they can see that the workings of this man's mind may be a danger to himself and the business empire that he and his family and his team have spent decades developing. It would be such a shame if this devil-may-care attitude would end up being the difference between the success and failure of what could prove to be one of the greatest gold mining dynasties in North American history. At least now the fans can learn more about what sort of mind is capable of succeeding in the world of gold mining and the world of reality television at the same time. Unfortunately for Tony, this doesn't help with chaos and disruption that has been caused by his reckless actions. For starters, he's already seen the main culprit charged with an almost $2,000 fine. He has also seen himself have to answer to the authorities at the Yukon Territorial Court. As much as Tony, the people at the Gold Rush show and his fans at home would have loved for those consequences to be all Tony had to face for his reckless actions, this would prove to be just the beginning of his problems.
Yeah, no, that's not how it works.
What do you mean that's not how it works? That's exactly how it works. I do all the work, I take all the risk, and you get all the money.
Pretty good deal, isn't it?
After the performance of the unnecessary prank, Tony found that he had triggered a ton of legal consequences and a number of environmental concerns thanks to his reckless indifference in the face of the Viking funeral. Tony would find that the consequences would go beyond even the realm of his beloved TV show, as he'd soon discover that the funeral has become a major point of discussion for those watching at home and those working on the show. Perhaps even more troubling, the matter had also become a major talking point for the authorities, who were troubled that Tony would allow his men to perform such a silly prank. What's worse is that this has now linked itself to the very ability for Tony's mining operation to function to its full capacity. The consequences of these actions have proven to be so grave that even the fans cannot believe that they may have to speculate on the future of one of their most favorite characters on the show. For those who may be unfamiliar with how Tony may have ruined the chances of growth and even survival of his business, they'd be stunned to find that this Viking funeral had the power to affect Tony in the sense that now, a crucial water license for his mining business was in jeopardy. How he didn't think that the authorities may be hesitant to issue such a license to a man who seemed to disregard the safety of the environment is beyond us here and the fans at home. When you also consider the fact that many have expressed their dissatisfaction in Tony's effectiveness when it comes to land reclamation projects following some work that he did in the past, you'd find that the fans aren't too unreasonable to worry about the fact that this controversial homage to the ancient Norse burial rites may be fatal not only to Tony's application for this water license, but also to Tony's future on the Gold Rush TV show. That prank is looking less hilarious by the moment, isn't it? Now, not only does Tony have to worry about the acquisition of this water license application, he also has to worry about if this will have a negative effect on the Indian River claims business that he had also begun at the same time. To be honest, this has added more spice to the events taking place on the Gold Rush TV show. Mind you, nothing has actually been done about the environmental fallout, especially the pollution charges that emerged from the use of petrol during this unnecessary prank. Remember, that was the inflammatory agent that Mark was able to use to attain the full spectacle of the Viking funeral. Add the fact that Tony always seemed less bothered about land restoration projects that he needed to perform after some of his environmentally disruptive gold mining activities, and you'd find that the fans have reason to doubt when it comes to the continuity of Tony Beets' presence on the Gold Rush TV show, and even a gold miner as well. With the fact that his future in the Indian River claims was also at stake, it seems as though Tony was truly in a tight spot that he had only himself, and maybe Mark Favron, to blame. However, as time goes on, the fans come to terms with the fact that the impact of Tony's water license application was integral to the man's future. And as such, the tension grew double-fold as they realized that the future of the legendary miner was truly in the balance. With his participation in an act that seemed to promote the unethical use of petrol in an environmentally hazardous manner thanks to the release of dangerous toxins and carcinogens, there can be little surprise if or when fans find out that Tony was unable to secure that important water license. After all, the consequences were not some fictional repercussions that only affected the context of the show. No, these acts were affecting the environment in real time, and somebody had to pay. As such, fans wait intensely at the edges of their seats so that they can see if it is possible for Tony to get that much-needed water license. It must be annoying for the other teams on the show, as they'd also find that theirs and the future of the show was hanging in the balance as they waited for the result of this water license application.
Because that thing, that with everything. By the time they rewrite, redo, bingo. 3-4 months has gone by.
It must have come to the fans as a surprise to find that despite facing these massive issues, it seems as though Tony chose determination over everything, because rather than shrinking in agony as he faced these seemingly unconquerable problems, Tony decided to focus his attention on his profitable claims, most notably the coveted Indian River claim. Sure, they've had to wait for 2 years already for this application to clear, and now this prank is threatening to put all they had worked for in jeopardy. Somehow, Tony managed to gather himself together so that he can keep his eyes on the things that are in progress so far. For example, he was keen to keep his focus on the mining activities that were taking place at Nugget Cut on Paradise Hill. While this decision proves to show Tony's ability to fashion some financial strategy that is set to benefit his business and his family, it also shows that Tony is one tough nut to crack. It was going to take more than a few problems for him to be totally thrown off course. We guess that is one of the signs that a leader is ready to face his challenges head-on without letting other aspects of his life or business suffer for it. Perhaps that was why he was able to handle a sudden call from the water office. Was his fate decided already? That didn't matter. What mattered was that the fans watched as one of their favorite cast members seemed to be able to weather the storm in this tale of determination in the face of many trials. This allowed him to show an admirable commitment to the pursuit of gold in the face of trials and tribulations, and as such, this proved to add more layers to the character that is the legendary Tony Beets. Whether or not he had to deal with the pesky mining authorities and their annoying water license applications, Tony decided that he had to focus on other important tasks, such as the transportation of heavy mining equipment to the Indian River claims. Perhaps the most notable of these equipment was a 950 excavator that was needed to do some of the heavy work in the mines of the Indian River. When it was time to deal with this daunting task, Tony's interesting character came into play again. To complete this task, Tony decided to make use of an old lowboy to move the heavy equipment to its destination. This served to display the practical mindset of the boss, as he aimed to bypass the harsh disassembly process that is normally required for the regular transportation of equipment such as this. Such is the contradictory nature of this character. How could such a rational mind have allowed Mark to perform such a prank that nobody else asked for? Now, they are in hot soup, and it seems as though there's nothing they can do to get out of this lurch but work their way out of it. However, it still didn't mean that he still wasn't thrown by a surprising call from the water board. This, however, may not have been as surprising as the fact that he learned that he may have to reapply for this water permit following the events of this unnecessary prank. it may prove to be too much for the mining veteran because he and the rest of the world are aware that the rewriting and the resubmission of the water license application was something that could take months, if not years. Now he was forced to consider the fact that this prank meant that the current season might end up being a total waste, and now they may have to deal with the thankless task of moving all this heavy equipment without having anything to show for it. To make matters even worse, this will mean that they totally failed to come anywhere close to their target of extracting 9,000 ounces of gold from the front of the mines that season. This means that Tony's mining business was definitely at risk, because they would have failed to gain the millions of dollars that would have come with extracting all that gold. As you can imagine, this failure to reach this target must be massively frustrating for Tony Beets and his team. As such, the fans watched with giddy excitement as the team raced against time to see what they can do to save their team, while also getting to get a first-person view of what Tony was capable of as he chased success in the hard and unforgiving domain of Gold Rush. Sure, he must have been gutted, especially as he looked into how long it would take to recover from the blow that came from the water license board. But thankfully, Tony's kids seemed to try to lift their father's spirits up with some very humble offerings from the mines. This came in the form of some mined gold that came to a value of about $400. Sure, this seems to be just a pinch compared to how much the team was looking at if they were able to perform their work to their full capacity, but this modest extraction of gold from the mines proved to represent some progress, as this was 100 ounces more than the amount of gold that the team was able to extract the week before. As such, this could prove to be a source of motivation to the Dutch-Canadian mining expert. It had the power to help Tony overcome the troubling thoughts that came with the uncertainty surrounding the current status of his water license application. Perhaps they could focus on the positives that came with their current position by focusing on what represented their current success, no matter how small they might be. They soon found that this seemed to spark some sort of motivation to look into new mining tactics. It also pushed them to explore and research alternative locations to start mining on. That way, they'd have even more options that they could rely on to support their mining operations. With any luck, this could be the positive twist that they needed to maneuver through the unpredictable world of gold mining. What this also ends up proving is that Tony is truly one tough nut to crack. Thanks to his decades of experience and the determination that helped him push through all those years, Tony had even found some success in other industries. For example, even before Tony stepped onto any mining fields, Tony had already developed a wealth of experience in the fields of agriculture and construction, just like we mentioned before, as well as heavy equipment operation and oil pipeline maintenance. As you can see, it looked like he was more than prepared for a life out in the gold mines thanks to this wealth of experience in other fields. This shows that this man was a man who had a clear dream and vision when he decided to become a gold miner. His dream was a dream of becoming a gold miner. Over time, he achieved this dream so well, he soon became the so-called King of the Klondike. With any luck, our Royal Highness will be able to overcome his pressing issues so that he can attain his target of 9,000 ounces of gold. Maybe next time, he'll be wise enough to avoid performing a prank as silly as the Viking funeral. From worrying about the consequences of the performance of a dangerous and rather unnecessary prank to the resolve to develop the mentality to do all that it takes to push through such troubled times. Here's how Tony Beets suddenly died in the gold rush.